Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Minnesota Rack Stars podcast. And today we are on our way home from South Dakota, and we are recapping everything that we experienced out in South Dakota. I saw a giant whitetail. That was pretty sweet seeing him. He was making scrapes and just, it's that pre-rut time, so he was out doing his thing. We saw tons of coyotes. There were a few arrows flung. You'll have to listen to see what happened. And then also, I could have possibly ruined a guy's hunt. So you're going to have to figure out and listen to figure out what that's all about. But it's a great podcast. A lot of great experiences we had out here, along with some lessons learned. So I'll keep this short. We're in the vehicle coming home right now. I hope you guys enjoy the podcast, and let's get to it. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Minnesota Rack Stars podcast. And we are post-hunt, driving back to Minnesota. And we're not coming back empty-handed, put it that way. Not saying we killed something, but, well, actually we did. And we'll talk about that a little later. But, yeah, we're coming back with some deer, so we're pretty excited. We got 2 bucks, 2 wall hangers. Right, Jerome and Dale?
That's right. That's correct.
Yeah. No, we stopped at a taxidermist that I take my deer to in Watertown and picked them up. I got my Velvet 9 and my Muley that I shot a couple years ago, and we're picking up. So pretty excited to have those guys back. I know my daughters are excited. They're telling me where we're going to hang them in the house, and yeah, so we'll see. We got some projects to do here this week. But how are we doing up there, guys? I know it's a little bit of a trip back for us, but are we hanging in there?
Absolutely. Yep, we're doing good.
Yeah, Jerome's driving right now. Dale's in the passenger seat, and I'm chilling in the back seat. But yeah, to be up front, we did not kill a deer, but we had plenty of encounters and saw some good deer. And I guess kind of where I want to start, coming off the last podcast, we talked about some things that we were going to try and do coming into this hunt, and some of the strategies, things we've changed. And I'll kind of let you guys start. You guys said you kind of, did things different this year compared to some previous years. And I don't know, one of you guys want to talk about like the strategy that you guys used coming into this year and how it kind of played out for us?
Yeah, well, this year I think we did a little bit more scouting in the mornings rather than going out and sitting right away. I think that helped a little bit in trying to figure out where the deer were moving and where they were coming out, just because things can change differently. I think we mentioned in the last podcast that there was more water out there this year, so there could have been changes in feeding patterns and just places where they were bedded down. So we did a little scouting in each of the mornings and kind of took what we learned from that and kind of went by placements of where we were going to be sitting in the evenings and such, and what we did in the afternoons.
Yeah, you're kind of limited in the spots that we could scout right away. I did a little trip to kind of figure out some different spots could maybe glass from that I could probably use in the future. But yeah, we kind of just did some glassing, and at this time of year, it's mid to late October, and those big boys, they're working their way back to bed before that sun really starts to come up for the most part. And the tough part is not all the time. I mean, sometimes you get a buck that stays out later at night or something bumps him and he wants to get back to his bedroom and he's a little late coming back in. But playing the odds, the odds of killing a buck this time frame, I think it's October 20th right now, we're just on the front side of good buck movement in the morning. So we kind of stayed out and we glassed. We saw a deer, in the morning glassing, but we saw a lot of other things besides deer, and a few things right in the yard too, didn't we, Jerome?
Yep, everything from skunks to coyotes and everything in between.
Yeah, and turkeys.
Turkeys, a lot of turkeys.
Turkeys. The one thing I guess we can really take from this podcast is, or this trip, I should say, is the amount of coyotes that we saw was ridiculous. I think every time we went out and sat or glassed, we were seeing coyotes. It was insane, the amount of coyotes that were out there. And, so that was the one thing we noticed right away. It was tons of coyotes. And when you got coyotes running around, I don't know, my experience in the past is that coyotes aren't going to push deer out necessarily, but they are going to put stress on them and kind of bump them around a little bit. Not like a timber wolf. Timber wolf will usually clear deer out in a hurry. But I don't know. It was something you didn't want to see right away, and I know our mindset went to immediately, if we're in the stand and we see a coyote, it's going to get an arrow flung at it. But, there was plenty of encounters, and let's just kind of recap, like day one, we went out, we scouted, we saw the coyotes. One of my favorite parts of the trip, Dale, is when I get breakfast made for me. Dale's kind of our camp chef, and he does an amazing job. He kind of goes out and buys all the groceries because he knows what he wants to cook, and phenomenal job. Usually it's eggs and bacon and hash browns, some venison. I mean, you name it, he's making it, and it was delicious. So,
well, thank you. Kudos to you. It was very good.
Nice.
Yes, he's got a little outdoor. What'd you say? It's a Blackstone grill. Money. So we went out, we scouted, had some breakfast, and it was hot. It was hot out there. And the one thing I should mention is that one of our partners, ArcticShield, came out with a new line of apparel, a whole new camel pattern that I absolutely love, and different material, and it worked out perfectly for me. I was wearing the ArcticShield early season apparel and the mid-season apparel that they have. And the reason why it was perfect, because in the mornings it was around that 40-degree mark, and in the afternoons or midday it was upper 70s, even hit 82, I think, at one point. So having, the diversity with the camouflage was perfect, because I stayed rather cool when it was 80 degrees, and I'm wearing really, really light apparel. And not only how perfect it was for temperatures, I really like their new camel pattern. What do you guys think of that new camel pattern that they came out with?
We were trying to see you this morning when you were walking around,
yeah.
And we kind of joked about it, but it was true. We couldn't see you. It blends in really well, and then until we saw some movement, it's like, oh, there he is. But it's for early season, it's very good. You blended in very well.
Yeah, and it's, to my knowledge, is that ArcticShield is the only one with this pattern. They came up with it, and I think they worked with Bill Jordan to come up with it, and it's really nice. I really like it. It's a nice pattern, and more importantly, it did the job when temperatures were extremely high, and then when temperatures were cooler in the morning. So, hats off to them for coming out with a great product and improving their product. So it was upper 70s on that first day. Went out, we did some scouting, didn't see much for deer, saw the coyote, had breakfast, and then we decided to go check out a piece of the property that you guys have never really been to before. And I took the e-bike. My neighbor Nick let me borrow his e-bike, and I took it up to the start of this cut that runs through a little valley that runs through the property, and I started doing some glassing, and the wind was coming right into my face, and we had about a 20-mile-an-hour wind, right? And I just started slowly walking to the south. To the north. It was a northwest wind blowing right in my face, and I started on the south, and I started working this cut moving up, and I'm sitting there walking slowly, and all of a sudden, boom, something caught my attention to the right of me, and here it kicked up a coyote right away. Boom, he takes off running. pardon me, but I need to backtrack. Before we started this, antelope were everywhere. A few really nice bucks. Mm-hmm. And then also we saw those mule deer up on the side hill there.
Yeah.
Yep. There's about 6 mule deer bucks that were up there. So we kind of waited, and they were kind of feeding off over the top of the hill. And then once they fed over the top, or getting close to the top of the hill, they were on the neighbor's property. We really couldn't do anything about it, so we said, the heck with it, let's just go. So I started walking, making my way to the north, and I kicked up that coyote. And I just slowly kept working my way over each cut, and bow in hand, release on my D-loop, and all of a sudden I come over the top of this cut, and it's about a, 12-foot drop in this cut. And all of a sudden I come over the top, and I see these tines, and I look down, and I draw back, and this muley buck looks right at me. And this muley buck, it's October 20th right now, and this was, 3 days ago? He was in full velvet yet. He was in full velvet. He looks right up at me, and I draw back, and he runs to the other side of the cut, goes on top, and stares right at me about 30 yards. And I had the pin right on him, and I just elected to pass. And I would say this buck was probably 3, maybe 4 years old. It was a good buck, and in, I don't know, muley terms, I guess he was just a 2x2. I don't know, a fork, I guess you would call him. But yeah, I could have shot him, but it was the first day, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna pass on this guy. But yeah, he was a good one, and he took off, and he ended up running up that ridge that those other mule deer bucks were on. And Jerome and Dale were making their way, cutting across the open prairie, and I waved them over, and I told them, let's work this cut, because this is the perfect wind. It's blowing right in our face, and these cuts aren't that deep. And so we started walking these cuts, and I don't know, I'll kind of let you guys take over, because, Jerome, this is where your part of the story kicks in.
Well, as we're walking the edges, you eyed the shadow of a mule deer, and it ended up being a doe, and it was really right below us, and you said, if you want, you can take a shot and look at it. And so I got in position, and it was a nice mule deer doe. It really was. And they are so much bigger than whitetail does. It's crazy. So if you get a mule deer, is always going to be a lot of meat, a good meat. And so I took a crack at it, and unfortunately I missed it. I shot over the top of it, and her and her fawn took off. But that was my one chance of pulling back at a deer that I took this year. But it was a new experience doing the spot and stock. I've listened to a lot of podcasts about doing it, and I actually tried to do it. It was actually a lot of fun, and I wish I would have got that deer, but a little excited, and shot over her back, and so be it. She didn't hang around. She got out of there pretty quickly, but that's how that ended up. But that was my first time attempting a spot and stock where I actually pulled the string.
Jerome, it was a lot more exciting than that. It was very exciting. You downplayed that, man.
Well,
I'm sitting there going, so one thing we figured out was, it was, like I said, it was mid-70s, right? Yep. Mid to upper 70s. And it was a northwest wind, and these deer were bedded on the south side of the cuts because they were in the shadows. And that's what we figured out right away, is that they want to be in the shade, and the wind's hitting them right in the face. It's nice and cool right there. And, yeah, we just started working that cut together, all three of us. And, yeah, I poked my head up, and all of a sudden, boom, there was that doe. And I got down, and I knew, Jerome, based off the last podcast, you said that, if you see a doe, you're going to shoot it. And I mentioned on previous podcasts before, the only way to get better at archery hunting or any type of hunting is by killing things. And how many deer have you shot with your bow, Jerome?
One,
yeah. So, I mean, I'm like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity for Jerome to continue to hone in on his archery skills. If he wants to hold out, that's fine. So I'm waving him over, and they come over. And like you said, I told you, if you want to shoot it, go ahead and shoot it. If not, just go through the motions of pretending like you're going to shoot it. So basically, we were kneeling right next to each other. I said, get your release on the D loop and stand up and, pull back, stand up, and pretend like you're going to shoot it. If you're not going to shoot it, if you want to shoot it, go for it. But just practicing all these things in real-life situations is going to get you better. And, Jerome went through all the right steps. He did everything correct and, just didn't end up getting it in the end. But still, I mean, that's just one more opportunity that you got to practice. And when I asked you afterwards, okay, if you could push rewind, what happened? And what did you tell me? What went wrong?
Well, you had mentioned shoot low because of the angle.
Yep.
And I didn't quite do that, and that was my biggest fault probably. And you always say, make sure you shoot to kill. And I was more excited probably than anything of the opportunity. And you got a mule deer doe looking right at you when you're pulling the trigger on it, and I just shot too high. I blew it. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like I said, like you had that opportunity. Now the next time, it's one of those things where you learn, and hopefully the next time you can slow it down a little bit. But everybody knows who has ever gone hunting before. That's why it's so important to take advantage of these opportunities, because you can't mimic the excitement and the adrenaline when you're just out there shooting target practice. And it's a great opportunity. It was a great opportunity to, learn from. And, I'm not going to say it was just a doe, but, I mean, if it was a big monster buck, I mean, you're going to be losing tons of sleep over it. But it was a great opportunity. It was fun. Like, looking back at day one, that was only half the day, because things got even more exciting as the day went on. So we continued a little further up, and like I said, it was hot. We weren't prepared to all of a sudden be right into deer, so we didn't have water and whatnot. So we only, stocked about half of that cut. We turned back. We went back to the vehicles because we also wanted to sit in our stands later that night. So we headed back to the hunting shack, and
well, there was one other thing you found before that.
Oh, that's right. So before we finished, good point, Jerome, good memory. There was like this little funnel running from like ridge to ridge, and I was just going to kind of walk out on it and kind of look over the next cut. And I started walking. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It stood out, white as can be. There's a shed laying there, elevated funnel, ridge. And it's laying right there, half of a muley shed. And I just looked beyond it about 10 feet, 12 feet or so, and I could see two little tines sticking out of the grass. So I ended up finding a match set of muley sheds. So that was pretty cool to end that stock that day. So we didn't leave empty-handed on that stock. That was pretty sweet. That's my first set of muley sheds that I've ever found. I don't think I've ever found a muley shed before.
And it was a pair.
Yeah, and a match set. So that's pretty sweet. So yeah, if you go on our Instagram page, I got pictures of that there. So so we make our way back to the hunting shack, grab a little bite to eat, and about this time, I think it's 2 o'clock, Jerome. Yeah, somewhere in there, 2, 3. Jerome's like, I'm going to hit the stand. I'm like, holy buckets, it's hot out yet. Jerome's going to head out to the stand. I'm like, all right, I'll be right after you. So I wanted to shower up. I was stinky from doing all the stocking, and I wanted to shower up. It just helps me refresh too mentally, and I get cleaned up, and I probably left about, I don't know, a half hour after you walked out, Jerome. So I'm leaving the yard at about 2:30 or so, and Jerome and Dale are already out to their spots, and I rode the e-bike out halfway, and then I walked the rest.
Well, as I'm going out, there's 7 whitetail does and fawns in one of the cattle pens. As I'm walking out, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. There they
That's
are.
Right.
And they're all staring at me. And
this is
like
2:30.
2:30 in the afternoon.
75 plus degrees.
There's deer out eating, and, eating the little, because they've gotten rain, there's a lot of little green stuff growing up, I suppose, from feed or whatever, oats and whatever. They're in there, packing it down the food, and here they are sitting there, and then they notice me. And so I walk, it's like, well, I'm not going to try to get one of them because that ain't going to work anyway. So I walk around the ridge down below, and then I come back up, and they see me again, then they finally take off. But So I'm already seeing 7 deer walking out to my deer stand.
So Jerome sees 7. I'm coming out a half hour after him. And there's a spot that we kind of picked out when we were turkey hunting this spring. We were turkey hunting. We were kind of walking around looking for turkey sign. And all of a sudden we bumped up a bunch of deer in this spot. And the reason why they were there, it's kind of a little, I don't know, bend in the river, but then, or the creek. But then there was a bunch of tall grass. And this past spring, there wasn't much for cover for grass. And that's where all these deer were bedded. So we're like, okay, put that in the memory bank. This was a good bedding spot. And we talked about that. So in my head, I'm like, I'm going to go set a stand, downwind of this bedding area. And, yeah, it's like 3 o'clock now. And I'm heading out to this spot. And I'm crossing this fence. And I look up and I see a deer out in the field where I'm going to set up. Like, I had in my mind an area that I wanted to set this stand up, and this buck is standing right in the area that I wanted to hang this stand. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I didn't realize how big he was until I pulled up my binoculars. I saw him, but then I really didn't realize how big he was until we actually went back and looked at the footage. Really nice 10-pointer. A really nice 10-pointer. I would say he's, right around that 150 range. He wasn't very wide, but he was really tall. And he was already out there at 3 o'clock, 75-plus degree heat. And then I'm like, okay, Jerome's over in that neck of the woods. I thought Jerome was over to the east of where this buck was. I'm like, he's working his way east. Perfect. I'll let him head that way. So I was actually going to work my way around the west and kind of loop way around. Well, here there was like 5 more deer out in the field. I'm like, well, I have to abandon ship here and figure out a different place to hunt. So I actually just set up in a tree right next to where I was standing and glassing this buck. But I watched him for probably 8 minutes or so, and it was awesome. He was sitting there eating, and then he worked his scrape line. He was working the heck out of the ground. He was rub urinating, and he even got on his back hind legs to hit a licking branch, which was sweet. So it was a really sweet experience, and that's what's so cool about coming out here. You can see so much. You see good deer. So I was really excited to see him, and he was working his way east. I'm like, well, I'm just going to set up here because that creek does kind of loop back around where I'm at right now. So I just set up a stand right where I was, basically watching him. And it wasn't the ideal spot, but I just set up and actually had, I think it was 5 does, like all full-size does, come in right by me. So that was pretty sweet. So that was kind of my first night in the stand. Jerome, what did you end up seeing that first night on stand?
I had a doe and 2 fawns actually come right underneath my stand eventually. And it was still early. It was about 4:30, something like that. They followed the creek line, and they were eating, and they drank a little bit. And at first, the 2 does came underneath, and the doe was kind of hanging back, and she knew something was up, but she couldn't quite tell. And I don't know how tall is my deer stand, about 18 feet up, probably something like that.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
And so she didn't. Eventually, she came right underneath and was eating underneath my stand for a while, and then I eventually left. So, but I chose not to take that doe. In hindsight, probably should have, but I didn't at the time. And and I saw the doe and 2 fawns several times after that. So they're still doing well out somewhere in South Dakota there. So, but it was nice to see them, and it's always neat seeing deer, especially when you tricked them, you beat them. They don't know you're there, and so that was pretty cool. They were in front of me for about 20 minutes, something like that.
How about you, Dale? Night 1, what'd you all encounter?
Well, my night 1 wasn't as exciting as your guys'. I went to a spot where I had seen deer the last couple of years there, so I was just kind of checking out, more scouting than anything that first night, just to see if there was any changes. But there wasn't any deer. I did see 2 coyotes that were kind of working that same area, and 1 pheasant, but that was about it for night 1 for me. So I was pretty excited to come back and see the footage that you had in the pictures and the story that Jerome was talking about with the doe and the 2 fawns, or the ones in the pen too, because that told us something too for later on.
Yeah. So
and it's not really a pen; it's more of a cattle yard.
It's a cattle
Right.
yard, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Day 1 was pretty intense. So switching to day 2, kind of did the same thing. We went and scouted, and my original plan was scout and then get out there and set up earlier, so that I could be ready for that 10-point if he come back in. But we did run into a little bit of a problem the day before. That e-bike that I was using blew a tire. I don't know if I hit a cactus or something and ran it through a tire, but we kind of had a flat tire, so we ran into town looking to get it fixed, and we found that green slime or whatever, and we filled that baby up with it and got it back on the bead and filled it up. So we took care of that, and then like I said, my plan was like, I got to get out there early, and it was hotter out. It was like 80 now. Jerome, you and Dale went back to the spot where we were doing that spotting and stalking, right?
We did, because we still had a northwest wind, and it was still blowing. In fact, I think it was blowing harder.
It was blowing harder.
Day 2 than day 1. It was, and it blew almost till 5 o'clock that day. It was ridiculous. But same northwest wind, and we thought, well, maybe they're back. Maybe there'll be different deer in there. And so we started. I think we walked 2 or 3 of the caverns, and it was just getting too hot. Even with the water, we're just like, ugh. And so we did not see any deer that day. But then
Or antelope.
Or antelope, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They had moved. They were on the other side of the highway, actually, that day.
Right.
So, but so we did try the spot and stalk again, because it is actually, that is a neat way to hunt. And with the wind in our favor, the wind takes out your scent, hopefully, and it takes out your noise, and that gives you the advantage. And we still had that northwest wind, and the way those coulees or caverns were set up, it was to our advantage. And they just weren't there that day, but at least we tried.
So you guys went out there. I headed out to the stand, and I had to tear the stand down because I had it up from the day before. I tore it down, headed across the field, set it up, and the whole time, like, I'm on pins and needles, because I'm just thinking in my head, one wrong noise, this buck's going to hear me, he's going to take off. So I'm trying to be as quiet as possible. And everyone knows that when you're setting up a stand, you're going to hit something or break a twig or something that's just going to drive you absolutely insane. But just kind of weathered the storm, and I got it set up. And I think once I got the stand set up, all my camera gear situated, I think I did my first interview at 1:53. So basically it took me 2 hours to get out there and get all set up. So it's 2 o'clock, right? And I'm like, okay, this buck came out around 3 o'clock, so I got about an hour here to settle down. Hopefully he repeats himself. And in my mind, I'm envisioning when I was out during the same time frame, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago now, probably 4 years ago, there was a buck that came in. I was getting ready to get out of my stand, okay? 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I was getting ready to get out of my stand, and I'm packing up all my gear, and I lower my bow to the ground, and I'm just about ready to take off my safety harness, and I hear something coming in behind me, crunch, 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 and I'm like, this better not be a big buck. And I slowly look over my shoulder, and I can just see the outline of him, and I can see his rack, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. My bow is on the ground, and here's the biggest buck I've ever had in an encounter with right below me. And I just look at the stand, my tree that I'm facing, I just close my eyes, I'm like, you have to be kidding me. And I turn around and I watch him, and he makes a scrape 5-6 yards from me and walks off. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So then the next night I went back to that same spot, and I'm like, this time I'm going to be ready for him. And I I sat there. I stood up in my stand because the stand, if you've ever been out to South Dakota, there are very few straight trees. And there's only one spot we could put this stand in. And it has to face the direction that the deer are coming from. And there's no cover in front of me. There's good backdrop cover behind me, but nothing in front of me. And when the deer come out, it's just me. I'm exposed. I'm right on the field. And so I have to be ready for when deer come out. So I'm sitting there, and it was getting to be that time of night when I saw that buck come out. And I just got prepared. I turned my camera on. I put my release on my D-loop, and I looked up, and I kid you not, here stepped that buck out right about that same time. He crossed the creek, and he's coming right at me. He's 45 and right at me. And I'm like, let's go. He's coming to hit this scrape. I'm like, I'm knocking this guy down. And he comes in, and he hits my track, and he stops, and he starts smelling, and he just gave me it was slightly quartering to shot, and I put a heck of a shot on him, and he ended up going about, I don't know, 50 yards or so and tipping over. But that's what I had in my mind here on day 2, is that this buck's going to do the same thing, right? He's going to come out and he's going to hit this scrape. This is the exact same time frame. So it's getting to be about that 3 o'clock time, and I'm getting pretty jacked up. And now it's, a little after 3:30, somewhere in there, and I see movement. I'm like, yes, let's go. And I pull up the binoculars, coyotes. I'm like, come on. And those coyotes come out of that bedding area. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. And they were messing around. There's 2 of them. And they're messing around. I'm like, are there going to be any deer left in this bedding area after these coyotes just come through here? So in my mind, I'm like, okay, hopefully they were on the east side of all these deer, so the deer wouldn't smell them, and hopefully they just hold tight. Well, coyotes kind of ran off a little bit, and ended up being about 5 o'clock-ish, 4:30, 5 o'clock. Finally saw some deer movement coming out of that bedding area. And a bunch of does started working their way out, and then all of a sudden I saw horns back in the trees. And I pulled the glass up and sitting there putting them in there, and I could tell they're bucks, but I didn't think they were the caliber of the buck that I saw the day before. And they weren't. They were 2 different bucks. One I think was an 8-point, and then the other one, I don't know if he was a 9-point, but they ended up working their way out in the field. They split up. Each buck went their separate ways. And so I got like 5, 6 does out in the field and this one buck out in front of me. And all of a sudden they're on pins and needles most of the night because these coyotes kept running around. And they did push the deer a little bit. They kind of ran off a little bit, but the deer just totally didn't clear out. So that's something, that I noticed that, coyotes aren't necessarily going to run off the deer. They're going to put them on edge. So these deer ended up working their way towards me, and the does ended up working their way off, and this buck separates himself from the group, and he starts coming my direction. And the creek that I'm sitting on kind of bends out in front of me, and he's coming towards that bend in the creek. And I said, if he turns left and comes towards me, I'm slinging an arrow. If he goes right, he's scot-free. Well, what's he end up doing? He goes straight. He goes straight into the creek, hops the creek, and heads up the ravine, and then takes off. But I got great footage of him. I'm going to be putting a video together here of him. Lots of good footage of him out in the field. He was a good buck. He had one really long brow tine. That brow tine, I don't know, was probably 8 inches long or so, and the other one was short. He was a unique buck. He was pretty sweet to have that encounter. But yeah, so I ended up seeing those guys. Coyotes didn't come in close enough. So that was kind of my night 2. High anticipation, but the big boy did not step out. That was kind of my day 2, night 2. Did you guys encounter anything day 2? I don't remember.
Just the coyote that eventually went to you, I believe.
Yeah, so holy buckets did they put on a show with howling and communicating back and forth. I think I ended up seeing, it was 4 coyotes just insane, the amount of coyotes that we were seeing.
That coyote was probably 100 yards from where my stand was across the creek.
Sure.
And he smelt me because he just stopped and looked directly at me for no reason. And I wasn't moving, but he just pinpointed me, and then he got out of there very fast.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and they were probably, I don't know, 200 yards from me. And, you know, it's one of those things where if I'm out hunting for a big buck or whatever and a coyote comes in, it's going to get an arrow. You know what I mean? It's just going to, you know, it's just going to help out the deer herd, the pheasant, you know, all that stuff. And, yeah, I'm always motivated to shoot a coyote when they come out. Dale, did you encounter anything night two?
Day two, I was in my new ground blind, so it was a new spot, kind of just taking a look at where things were at. And I saw a couple of doe and a couple of fawn, I think, but they were too far away. But it was good to see them, at least have an encounter with them. I think every time I sat, I was looking at deer at some point, but nothing that came in close.
Yeah, it's kind of hit and miss in some of the spots, and you know, if the deer aren't there that night, you're not going to see much. Right. But so that was kind of day two, right? Now day three, you know, we're starting to get pressed for time a little bit, and the biggest thing is, you know, like for myself hunting this new property, I wanted to learn it, and you know, that's kind of what you have to do, kind of like what you guys were talking about the first time you come out, and anytime you start hunting a property for the first time, you got to take that time to learn it and understand it. So day three, we decided that Jerome and Dale were going to get in their stands, and I was going to go for a little hike. On the way out, you know, I think we might have kicked up some deer. Yeah, we saw some deer. We kicked up some deer, you know, along the creek, and kind of went our separate ways. Jerome went to his stand. I put Dale in a spot where I was seeing all those deer the night before. It's kind of a little low valley that they were kind of working in between this bedding area and the creek. And did you see anything that morning, Dale?
Not in the morning, I didn't. I kicked up a couple of doe and a coyote across the creek saw me, you know, on the way out there.
Sure. Nothing for you too, right, Jerome, that morning?
Nothing.
Yeah. So I decided I'm going to go learn this country a little bit, and I pulled the Onyx measuring tool and a distance tool, and it showed 4 miles from where I was at all the way to the north end boundary. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make this hike all the way up to the north portion because I see some big cuts up there, and I wanted to kind of see what they were like, and I wanted to see a couple other spots in the creek where could maybe put up a stand. And I decided I was gonna hike it and maybe run into something along the way, and I did. I ran into a bunch of things, and it was pretty exciting hike to say the least. So I take off, and it's right at sunrise, and I was hoping to, you know, catch some deer working their way back to bed or near their beds, you know, just before they lay down, where it's a little easier to see them with the binos. So I started going, and you kind of get a little bit of an eerie feeling when you're out in big country, when you don't see vehicles, you don't see houses, you don't see, you know, trees at some point, you know, I don't know, it's just different. And so I'm sitting there going, and I'm trusting my Onyx and following. Basically what I'm doing is I'm following the side-by-side path that the rancher has to go check the cattle tanks and whatnot. And I'm following it, and there is some portions where his private property butts up to some public and whatnot. And I'm sitting there going, and I'm following a trail, and it kind of cuts through the public. So I'm walking through the public, just on the border, basically. And I look up to the west, and I see this guy walking, this hunter. And I'm sitting there walking, and I'm like, well, he probably doesn't think there's another hunter out here because I'm not parked on the, you know, at the access. I'm cutting across through the public or the private, and he sees this guy out here. I'm like, hopefully I'm not ruining his hunt, you know. So I'm sitting there walking, and I'm just kind of on a mission to get to the north boundary, right, and open country. And I'm sitting there walking, you know, about 3 minutes later, I look up, and something catches my eye like 40 yards away from me. And I look, and I freeze right up because there is a mule deer buck staring right at me, 40, 50 yards away, bedded down in this tall grass. And I stop, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And he gets up, and he bolts, heading to the north. And for some reason, I look back up to where that hunter was. He was walking to the south, and all of a sudden, he stopped, and he turned, and he went walking back towards the access. Now, in my mind, right away, I was like, that's why he was walking this direction. My guess is he was up top doing some scouting. He ended up putting this mule deer to bed, saw where he bedded down, and he was going to put a stalk on him, and I just ruined it for him. I felt so bad because I know how much time goes into scouting, glassing, and getting an opportunity. Getting an opportunity to put a stalk on something is just tough. But later on, I did find out that the rancher was up over in that area and was talking to the guy, and supposedly he was out doing some, I don't know, pheasant hunting or grouse hunting or something. So that made me feel a little better if that's what that guy was doing, because if he was out archery hunting, I feel bad because I might have blown that hunt for him. So I ended up running into that mule deer. The mule deer takes off, and I continue on my way to the north, and he ended up running it and meeting up with some does and fawns, and they ended up seeing me, and they ended up busting off further to the north. But that was kind of that little encounter. Made it a little further, made it to another checkpoint that I wanted to get to, stop, and there's this little knoll. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go on top of this knoll here and just sit down, have some water, have a bite of the sandwich, and kind of keep moving on. Well, I get to the top of this knoll, and all of a sudden, boom, I see movement, and I get down right away, and I pull up the binoculars, and you wouldn't believe what I saw. Coyote. There was a coyote right there. So I'm like, all right, he's facing my direction. Let's see if we can get a shot at this guy. So I get set up, and sure enough, he's coming my direction, and he just ended up staying out of bow range, like 80 yards or so. And he ended up catching my wind. He got downwind of me, and he took off. So, whatever. That was that. I kept making my way up to the north part, and I ended up making it up there, and I saw some really beautiful scenery up there. And I told myself, if I don't see a deer heading up there and I don't bump into something, I'm fine with it, because I knew the view that I was going to see up there was going to be pretty sweet. And there were some pretty big ravines and cuts that were in there. I really wasn't able to do a whole lot of stalking in there. So it was more just kind of glassing a little bit, and I didn't see anything in there. It wasn't as accessible as the other place or the other spot that we were doing the spot and stalking in. But it was cool. It was a challenge that I wanted to challenge myself of going on this hike by myself and seeing if I could put a little plan in place to try to, harvest something. But if I didn't harvest anything, it was just kind of a goal of mine to make that hike all the way up there and check out that scenery. So I was able to do that. That was pretty cool. Dale and Jerome ended up picking me up at the end of the hike, so that made the track back a little easier than walking. And as we were driving back, I told these guys I really didn't realize how far I actually hiked. It was actually a pretty far hike, but you guys thought I was kind of nuts going for that little hike.
Kind of.
I told them what I was going to be doing, and they said, what?
Even the rancher had questions about you.
Yeah, I question myself sometimes too.
Because it wasn't a flat walk. It was up and down.
Yeah, it was. I know I was a little sore the next day, but I've been kind of doing some training with my weightlifting classes, and this is what kind of motivates me to lift, is to try to stay in shape to do things like this. One of my goals is to get out and do some elk hunting, and I told you guys later that night when I was starting to stiffen up a little bit, I told you guys, I said, well, if I'm going to go hike some bigger mountains, I got to get in a lot better shape, because I'm already sore after just doing this. I would say it was probably, I think I pulled my track. I think it was like 7.5 miles that I ended up hiking. But you throw your backpack on there and your bow and all that stuff and cameras. It weights you down quite a bit. But it was fun, and I'm glad I did it. Just kind of a challenge that I made to myself, and was able to do it. It would have been sweet if I would have been able to harvest something, but that's not always the goal in mind. It's just being able to accomplish things that you weren't really sure that you could do. So that was cool.
The nice thing about South Dakota is that you don't have all deadfalls on those hills and mountains like you do when you're in Colorado elk hunting and stuff like that, when you're climbing over all these deadfall trees.
Right.
You just got to worry out for cracks and rocks and stuff like that so you don't trip.
Yeah. So let's go to your guys' night. So when I got back, I basically used their fence, their cattle gates, to hang our clothes up. Like, I was drenched in sweat, so I hung everything up and let it air out a little bit, and then basically douse it in ozonics to try to kill that scent. But I'll let you guys kind of talk about your night hunt. I don't recall what you guys saw or if you saw anything, but
so this would have been Saturday night,
day
3?
That would have been, yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I switched up because winds were supposed to change a little bit.
That's
and I didn't see anything on day 2 by my stand. And so I had another stand that I tried that in the previous years on that Saturday. I've missed my 2 deer out there. And I thought, well, maybe I'll have a chance at a deer again this year. But it did not go as planned. And earlier in the day, when we talked to the homeowner, when they came back for coffee about 8:30, they said, oh, yeah, we saw a doe right here, right past the garden in a pen over here, right next to their driveway. And so I thought, well, it wasn't prime time yet, but we've seen so many deer around the actual farm place itself, and I hadn't been seeing anything for about 3.5, 4 hours and no sign of activity. So I went down and I tried getting to the farmstead and maybe cut off some of them deer that were coming up to that area. And as I'm getting close, 2 deer were already there. They saw me and they busted. So my plan kind of went kaflooey there, but at least that's the only deer I saw that night, and I was going to try to maybe cut them off closer to the buildings, but that didn't happen.
How about you, Dale?
Yeah, Saturday night, I went back to that place where you saw the deer, the original, before you put the stand up, or even before you put the stand up in, and kind of went to a little island of trees that were kind of probably about 300 yards from where your stand was hanging, and you saw those deer. So it was a nice little couple of deadfalls there. So kind of set in the middle of those. I didn't have the ground blind with or a hanger stand, so kind of made do with what I had down there. And it was a nice choke point about 40 yards across, right where those deer were coming. And then, as you said, they were, kind of going up the hill or migrated up the hill there. So my hopes were pretty high because you had said, oh, yeah, there was, 20, 30 deer out there or whatever it was, and a 9-pointer and a 10-pointer, So I was out there probably about 2:30 or so. It was pretty early because I didn't want to, get busted like you did or, see the deer out there already in the field. And I was sitting there and, just wondering if you were telling the truth or not because it was 5:30 and there was no deer in the field. Then, boom, 5 minutes later, there were 4 deer out there. There was 3 doe and a buck. Kind of, well, like I said, about 300 yards out. Just kind of came out of that wooded area there to the north of that field that you were in. And they came out and started feeding, and then they started looking kind of past your stand out from the southeast side, so it must have been a coyote. I could not see. There was trees there. Something got their attention over there, so they were kind of watching that a little bit closer than normal, and pretty soon just busted out and went back into the trees. I thought, well, it's 20 minutes before sunset, and so it was like, okay, that might have been the show. And another 5 minutes, another doe came back out and was kind of working its way, same direction. She was kind of looking in the same direction again, but didn't really bother her too much, and she kept on coming through. And I thought, okay, here's a doe. It's coming out, and 40 minutes, 35 yards, 40 yards is the longest shot through there, so she might have been 20 yards, but she turned around and went back in too. So I don't exactly know what was going on in that corner, but at that same time, she was just kind of moseying her way back into the woods. There was a, maybe some people would call them a fork horn. It's a tall spike with two little prongs at the top type of thing, and came out just right on the wood line and just kind of, like I say, working the scrape. Did a couple of scrapes. One would run direction, came back and did a few more scrapes, and then kind of disappeared into the woods again. So at least I had good encounter, but nothing that was coming this direction, where there normally was. But the wind was the same as when you were there, so they came out and were looking. Something was just distracting them a little bit over in the southeast corner, which is, the other side of where I was. So
at what point, I mean, did you think you were going to have an opportunity to shoot at one?
Yeah. When the first group came out, because you had said that they, come out and they, eat, and they're just kind of grazing and going up, and then they were going up towards the hill because there's a fence line there or a tree, or the creek kind of meanders through there, and so there was a little, like I said, a pinch point where I was sitting, and I was thinking it was either going to be, the buck. I couldn't really tell which one it was. It wasn't the big one, so it was a smaller buck of some sort. I couldn't really get the count of the number of tines on it, but at one point I was thinking one of those original four would be walking this direction and probably get a shot off at it. So then heart gets a pumping, and you're going, okay. Well, you're thinking, okay, put the D loop, hook in the D loop, pull it back. Make sure you got things level. All those things that you do for practice and you're doing, normally you just kind of, it all slows down and you're trying to think about, what you need to do. So,
yeah, it's fun getting that experience, and that's why, one of the reasons why we like hunting is that just adrenaline rush. It's fun because, I mean, when you're younger, you might have sports or whatever, and there's adrenaline rushes in sports and whatnot. But, I mean, how often when you get older do you, how often when you get older do you get to experience those adrenaline rushes like you do when you're out hunting?
Every day at work.
Yeah, right. I mean,
maybe not.
You don't get that, and people don't understand what they're missing. You know what I mean? Like, you don't. And to be honest with you, the only real adrenaline rush that I get nowadays is playing baseball. I play amateur baseball and playing in the state tournament. When the game's on the line, the adrenaline kicks in and the mind starts going a little crazy, and you got to be able to slow things down. And other than that, it's baseball and hunting. It's the only time I really get that adrenaline rush. So it's fun to experience that while hunting. It's something only hunters understand, that adrenaline rush when a deer comes in or a coyote or something like that, right? So that's fun. That's fun. You get to have that experience and get the ticker going a little bit. So you guys, Dale, you had some action. I actually transitioned. I ended up going to a different property. I'm really fortunate, really fortunate that now I have kind of two properties that I have permission on to hunt out in South Dakota. And, it's like I timed it. It's like 20 minutes apart, so that's pretty sweet. But I went up and was going to sit in a stand on this other property where I've shot a couple bucks out of. And I called the rancher, and he said, yep, it's fine, come on out. And he said, there are cattle in there, though, so, just give you a heads up. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind, that there'd be cattle around, but I'm like, well, they might, they could be a half a mile away. Those pastures are huge out there. Well, they weren't. They were right down basically where my stand is. They were bedded down. They were out eating in the field, and I didn't want to go down there and spook them. And I really didn't know how much, big deer would be in there if there's cattle, grazing and moping around down there. So I said, the heck with it. I'm going to go to a different spot. I see there's round bales over here on this field where I've seen deer end up making their way to feed for the evening. So I'm like, I'm going to cut back across and, just stand by a round bale and try to shoot something over there. Well, as I'm making my way across, there's already a doe and 2 fawns out there. I'm like, oh, dang it. So I'm like, well, there's only one thing to do, and that's to bust them off the field. So I head out there, and they take off running, and I just set up, and I was wearing my early season apparel, and it was perfect. I actually did have to go in the shade for a little bit, the shaded side of the round bale, but I sat there for a while and then started getting a little cool, so I put on the vest and hopped on the other side of the round bale, and I started doing some glassing. And as I was glassing, I spotted 2 really good mule deer about, 3/4 of a mile away, and there was no chance I didn't have time to go, try to put a stock on them. They were out in the open too, and I was just able to get some video of them, and kind of sun went down that the doe and 2 fawns end up working their way back. So I think they were probably at about 70 yards or so. But yeah, they worked their way back, and it started to get dark out, so I called it a night and made my way back to camp. And as I'm driving back, I see this deer on the side of the road going down into the ditch. And as I get closer, I look, and sure enough, nice big muley buck. And once you know it, he was actually going into the permission property that we were hunting. So that was pretty cool to see that muley buck. It was the only deer I saw on the drive home, and he was going on our permission property. So that was pretty sweet to see that, and I shared that information with these guys, so we all got excited.
I was happy that it was already across the road.
Yeah, right. So that kind of concluded day 3. Day 4 here was today. We're actually driving back right now on day 4. But we decided to hit the stands this morning. I'll let you guys tell your strategies for this morning and kind of how it played out for you guys.
Well, yeah, my strategy was my ground blind was in the spot where, we had done a lot of scouting and scoping out things in the mornings, and Jerome had got busted that one night, with the cattle yard, with the does and the fawns and such there. So there was only one real spot that they could come and go, that I thought anyway in my head, where they were coming from or going to after they were coming out of there. So that's where my ground blind was. So I was kind of saying, okay, I'm going out there. They had if they're in there, they're going to come out, and they're going to come this direction. And if they're not in there, I'm going to be, sitting out watching the sunrise, which is okay too. So I went out to that ground blind this morning and got out there. It was probably 30 minutes before sunrise, or legal shooting, I should say. So we were out there plenty of time before, and just sitting around. And, it was probably, legal shooting was probably 10 to 7 or something like that. No, sorry, sunrise was about 10 to 7 maybe. And it was right around that time I saw movement up in the cattle yard coming this direction. So there was a fawn that came out, and right behind it was 2 more fawns and a nice sized doe. And so they came out of that cattle yard, and just like you write it up, right? They come right down out of the pen. They come down. There's a little corner of the creek, so they could either go, like you said, go left or go right. And if they go right, they were going to going to go into the the path towards the yard. So I wasn't thinking they were going that way. So left would be to the open area and the pastures and so forth. So where your buck was going across the creek, I was like, come across the creek, which in more metaphor than anything, because it was straight ahead. It would be coming right past my ground blind. So they got about 60 yards away or so, and all morning long the wind was in my face. So it was perfectly coming that way. And then around that sunrise time frame, it switched and started coming more from my right to the left, which was blowing the wind right directly to where they were standing. So they got about 60 yards away and stopped and started looking to see what they were saying. But I was in a ground blind, so I wasn't moving around. But they didn't get any closer than 60, and they took off towards the hill. They stayed up there, so they weren't really busted out big time, but they stayed up there, and then they came back into the cattle yard a little bit and went off to the north after a while. But yeah, so that was my morning. That was you talk about the adrenaline rush, and when that deer was coming down, I think it was a pretty good sized doe, but like I say, it only got 60 yards. But you're still thinking, plan's working, it's coming. They're coming down through, and the heart starts pumping a little bit, and you get ready, and then when it goes, then your adrenaline kind of there's nothing for the adrenaline to do anymore. And it was cold this morning. It was 42, 44 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And after that adrenaline, or after they left, I was freezing. It got a little colder in the morning there. So, but that was my morning. It was a good experience again, a good adventure, but not close enough. I was not going to take a 60-yard shot, with the wind going like it was. I mean, but she was broadside, different than rifle hunting. When you're archery, you got to know what your limits are, and mine was not 60 yards. So
yeah. How about your experience this morning, Jerome?
Well,
This one's worth sharing.
Got up at the break of dawn with you guys, and that was good. And actually, I talked to one of my friends who is out in western Montana with my brother, and they ended up getting a nice bull elk on opening day of the rifle season out there, and got a chance to talk with him. And while his tag was burnt, and so Mike, my brother, was out, and he was hunting this morning. But I had a chance to talk to our mutual friend that we mule deer hunt with out in Montana, and he had a nice buck, so I congratulated him. So that was a good way to start the day. And then I went outside and sat in the yard, because we were seeing deer in the yard area. I wasn't like directly in front of the house or anything like that, but kind of out on the outskirts of the yard, and hopefully something would come through that I could have a chance at maybe getting. And just about legal shooting time, something like that, I finally caught something out of the left side. And so I look, and it wasn't a deer, and it was multiple things moving. And I ended up, 4 skunks were heading directly towards me. And so I, with, my training as a law enforcement officer, you got to think on your feet a lot, So I quickly got the hell out of there before those skunks, and they basically went right where I was perched. And so
you had 4 arrows. You didn't want to try.
Yeah, no. That would have been a long drive home if I would have got sprayed. So I'm glad I saw them. I'm glad I noticed them, and got the heck out of there before they made their way through. And then after that, about 7:30 or so, a doe and a fawn kind of ran west of my location. They were over 100 yards away, and they weren't stopping at all. So I didn't have a chance at that doe. So, but that was my last shot at a deer, and then that didn't happen. And then eventually we got stuff down from our stands, and we got Dale's blind down, and we collected that, and eventually we went up in your area, Joe.
Yeah, so my morning started out, I'm in a good spot. I'm close to a bedding area, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try, going to this spot. Last chance, it's our last opportunity, so might as well hit the stand, even though odds of shooting a nice buck in the morning right now really aren't in favor of you capitalizing on it. So I just went out, just kind of enjoy the morning, be able to see the sunrise, all that good stuff. Like you mentioned, Dale, it's a great point. Just being out there and seeing the sun come up, just beautiful out there. You know, where I'm at, I don't really get to see a whole lot of sunrises and sunset because I have so many trees around me. So it's something I really enjoy being able to see. But, you know, I was sitting there, and it was about that time. It was about 8 o'clock-ish or so, because we were talking 8:30. We were going to sit till and then head out. But it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I haven't seen anything. And you know, what's going through my head is, you know, that buck was making a scrape. He's kind of marking his territory. And we talked about this before, Jerome. You know, when do you rattle? When do you grunt? All those things. And I said, you know, I really don't blind rattle or grunt, you know, because more likely a deer's going to get downwind to you and smell you and bail out before you even get a shot. But I kept checking my wind, and my wind was blowing right back into a really thick portion of the creek where no deer could really get through. So I thought, you know what, if this buck is in here and he's a dominant buck, maybe if I just rattle lightly, that might spark some interest, and maybe he'll work his way over. And it was a last-ditch effort, you know, so I hit the horns together just real lightly, and I have one of those little miniature rattle packs or whatever you call them, pack racks. I don't even know if that's what it is. But anyway, little gray. It's got little knobs on it, and you just spin it and makes the noise like two bucks fighting. So I just lightly started hitting it together like, maybe there's two small bucks out there, and maybe I'll come over there and shush them off. You know, that's what was playing in my head. And so I rattled a little bit and waited for about, 5-10 minutes. And then I pulled out my grunt call, and I was like, you know what? Think in my head, you know, how am I going to mimic this call to get, you know, to spark that interest of that nice big buck? And I grabbed my grunt call, and I put it up to my mouth, and it's pretty calm. And I put the call up to my mouth, and all of a sudden, I haven't used that call in probably 2 years, and that reed was all seized up or whatever. And it was not a grunt. It was a dying peacock or something that I was trying to call it.
A deer in puberty.
It was terrible. Yeah, the voice was cracking, right? So, yeah, maybe it should have been perfect, right? A young buck. So, anyways, I hit this call. I'm like, well, that's about it, right? I'm calling it a day. And all of a sudden, I look to my left. Here's a coyote coming in. I'm like, what? So I'm like, are you kidding me? I just made all this ruckus. So, but like I said, it sounded like a dying peacock or something. That thing is coming on a beeline right at me, right towards me. And I'm like, boom, cameras, let's go. I get my main handheld camera going on my 430 camera arm. I got that rock and roll. Microphone's on. I get the secondary angle camera going. I get my Tactic camera going. And this guy's coming in, and kind of like my other stand on the other property, I'm exposed, right? So you can't really get away with much movement. So before he got into the opening, I already drew back, and I'm sitting there waiting. It'll be interesting to go back and look at the film to see how long I was drawing back on him. But I would say it was close to a minute, if not a minute. I was drawing back, waiting for him to come out, and he would start walking my direction, and then all of a sudden he would stop, and he sat down for a little bit, and then all of a sudden he got back up, and he walked a little more, and he was smelling, and I needed him to break off the trail of the creek and kind of cut in the opening, because I had my camera all set recording already. And, he ended up making his way out in front of me. I was about 15 yards or so. And, I put it on him, and I hit the release, and I heard it hit him. I saw it hit him, and he took off. He did the old jump spin turn, took off, and went about 20 yards and stopped. I'm like, yes, I'm going to watch him tip over right here, you know. And he sat there, and he was looking around. He was smelling, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. and all of a sudden he turned his head and he smelt where the blood was coming out and just freaked out and took off running. He went back the direction he came from, and I was pretty excited. And about 10, 15 minutes later, sure enough, here comes some doe and a few fawns come walking out where I originally were seeing deer. And I'm like, you know what? We kind of decided 8:30 was that time we were going to get out of the stand, and got a hold of Jerome and Dale and said, yeah, come get me. Let's go. I had to tear my stand down and get everything packed up and loaded up, and hopped on the blood trail of the coyote. And he was bleeding pretty good, but what ended up happening was I think I just kind of zippered him open, underneath. I mean, it was a perfect shot right behind the shoulder, but it was just, basically at the bottom of his chest. And, you could see on film that, blood, there was a lot of blood there and stuff, but he took off, and I tracked him for a ways, and then I got into some taller grass, and it was tougher to find blood. But I know it was a decent shot. It wasn't a great shot. It was a decent shot, but like I said, we kind of had a time frame to get going on the road. We all have obligations back at home. I got my mom staying with my kids and all that good stuff, so we kind of packed up, and we didn't recover the coyote, but we had to get on the road, so we got packed up, and we're heading for the hills, I guess you could say. But it's kind of cool. I was able to get an arrow into a coyote on the last day, so I was able to experience that adrenaline like you were talking about, Dale, especially on the last day. That's pretty cool. And we're helping out the rancher and the animals on top of that. So leaving here feeling pretty good about the hunt. It's just a really good trip. And what I kind of want to end with here is kind of the lessons learned from this trip. And I don't know, one of you guys want to start? I've been talking for a lot here. I'm sure people are extremely bored of me, but I don't know, something you want to take. How about the stalking portion?
Yeah, I really like the stalking portion. We never, excuse me, I've never done that before, and so just kind of figuring out that they were in the shade and they were facing the wind. It was really exciting to walk around and see that, and to every time you kind of come around a little coulee or a cutout, there was shade. You kind of got on adrenaline, a little rush there, because there's something might be there, and if you come around a corner and there's sun, probably not going to be there in 80-degree weather, sitting in the sun. So it was kind of fun to do that. I really liked that portion of it, although it was, like you say, pretty warm.
Yeah. Jerome?
How important the wind is when you're doing the spot and stalking. I mean, it's all about the wind, really, and you got to use it to your advantage. And again, it can cover up a lot of your mistakes as far as if you're making noise walking or whatever it might be. Another thing, the deer will tell you where to go hunt, and when you saw them deer come out, obviously Dale switched his spot where he went to, and deer are unpredictable. Why the heck are there 7 deer out at 3:30 in the afternoon in a feedlot? It's just like this isn't making sense. But,
and a monster buck out there too.
Yeah, and at the same time, an hour later, you're seeing a monster buck, and the deer will tell you where to go, and you just gotta. That's where your scouting comes in a little bit, or just learning each time you go out there. And next year, hopefully, we'll know more and have better insights. And to be honest with you, I'd like to go out there again if we can make a weekend work at some point. I know we have a lot of out-of-state trips still coming up, but I'd really love to go out there and give it another try.
100%. I guess for myself, lessons learned, I would echo everything you guys said. The other thing, too, is, like, when you're going on a stalk, it's hard to really punch in, like, okay, I need to be extremely cautious with every step and be extremely observant with every step, because when we first did that first stalk, I was just kind of walking not slow but not fast, somewhere in between. All of a sudden, boom, coyote takes off running. I'm like, dang it, if I was paying attention, that thing was directly across from me at like 30 yards. I could have shot it, And then even going out on that hike, I was just, yes, I had a goal in mind of, reaching the north portion of the property. But if I would have slowed down a little bit more, I might have had an opportunity at a mule deer buck. So just really slowing down, because what happened to me that first time we went out on that spot and stock was I really didn't lock in until that coyote. Now I'm like, okay, all right, lock in here, because there could be a deer over every single one of these cuts laying in the shade. So that's one thing I'm looking at. Another thing is, like you said, deer are there's very few deer that become predictable, and you could say, yep, they're going to do exactly this. But like you said, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, upper 70s, and you get a mature deer out in the middle of, in the sun, making scrapes, like, what the heck? And, it just unpredictability, and that's what is so fun about hunting. The other thing that I was reminded of on this hunt, everybody is at a different stage in their, hunting career, and everybody hunts differently. When I say this, I mean, like, when I'm out here, I'm focused on, trying to harvest a big mature buck. Like, that was my focus. And your guys' focus was different, Like you said in the previous podcast, if a nice mature doe presents herself, you're going to take that opportunity. And Dale, you're kind of the same way, where I'm more, I'm going to try to go for a big buck. That's the challenge I like. I've shot a decent amount of deer with my archery equipment. That's just kind of what I enjoy doing. And everybody has their own, goal in mind, and respect that. And if that's what makes a person happy, then so be it. Not everybody has to be, the big buck hunter or whatever the case might be. Respect it, have fun with it, and I think we did that on this trip, because I had a blast. I had a blast doing the spot and stock and trying to help you guys get on deer. When we were doing that, I wasn't even a priority of shooting a deer in my mind. Like, I wanted to get you guys on deer. I wanted to get you guys practice, and that was a lot of fun for me. Not only seeing deer, but just watching you guys be in the moment and seeing the looks on your guys' face, going over the top of those cuts, looking down, like you said, adrenaline going on pins and needles, not knowing what could be over the next one. That was a lot of fun. So thanks for bringing me along on this trip, guys. I appreciate it. You know what? The people listening to this podcast, they've probably already turned it off and are extremely bored. But this podcast here, we're going to be able to listen to and relive this story forever. And you know what? That's what it's about, is having a good time and remembering, the stories and all the experiences that you had. And that's why I like doing these podcasts, to kind of help remind me of the good times and the bad times, but also just creating those memories. And we created that again on this trip. So thanks for bringing me along. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely right.
Good deal. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. And, we're heading back to Minnesota. We probably have, another 2 hours left to drive for sure. And we'll be home and see the family and get some shut-eye. So work starts tomorrow. Fun. But, all right, thanks for listening, guys. We appreciate it. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast. I had a lot of fun out in South Dakota, and I enjoy talking hunting with a lot of people, but there's always that special, feeling you get when you talk hunting with family, and just you can relate to a lot of things. So it was a lot of fun just kind of recapping our hunt. And, like I said, we learned a lot of things out here on this hunt. But the biggest thing is just making those memories, even though we're coming back empty-handed, I guess you could say. It is fun. I do have the head mounts riding with me here. But, yeah, it was a great time. A lot of lessons learned. We had a great time on top of that. But, yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you to especially ArcticShield. This hunt was a lot more enjoyable with their new apparel. You guys need to check it out. It's a phenomenal camel pattern. But even better, they have, apparel for the early season. Like on this hunt here, it was, upper 70s, 80s. Had the perfect apparel to be out hunting. And also in the mornings when it was cooler out, I put on their midweight gear. So it was sweet to have that out there. Also, thanks to Domain Outdoor once again for helping us on this journey. 4th Arrow camera arms. I was able to use my 4th Arrow camera arm this week. It worked out nice. I'm probably saving an extra pound or so in my backpack, which helps a lot, especially when you're doing a lot of hiking. So it was nice being able to use that. And then also J&R Outdoors. My Uncle Jerome and I were talking, how nice would that be to have one of those 12-point stands out here in South Dakota where we could sit in there and do some archery hunting. But maybe another time we'll get one of those out there. But once again, thanks for listening, you guys. We appreciate all your guys' support. And I hope you guys are having good luck out there. The fun has just begun. Pre-rut's here, and the rut's just about ready to kick in full swing. Good luck to everyone out there, and thanks for tuning in.